You're standing in the grocery store looking at rows and rows of eggs stacked neatly in cartons. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe thousands in the whole store. Each one perfectly oval, white or brown, completely ordinary. You pick up a carton, take it home, crack one open, and make breakfast. It's such a routine action that you probably never stop to think about what you're actually eating. But here's a question that might catch you off guard. Why don't these eggs ever hatch into chicks? After all, eggs come from chickens come from eggs, so why doesn't the egg in your refrigerator ever turn into a baby bird? Some people assume it's because of refrigeration, that keeping eggs cold prevents them from developing. And while temperature does play a role, the real answer is both simpler and more interesting than most people realize. The most important thing to understand is that not all eggs are created equal. There are two types of chicken eggs, fertilized and unfertilized. A fertilized egg is one that has been exposed to a rooster's sperm and contains the genetic material necessary to develop into a chick. An unfertilized egg, on the other hand, is just an egg cell that was released by a hen but never met a rooster. It has no potential to become a chick, no matter what you do with it. You could keep it warm, you could incubate it for weeks, you could never refrigerate it at all, and it still wouldn't hatch. Why? Because there's no embryo inside. It's biologically impossible. And here's the thing, almost every egg you buy at a grocery store is unfertilized. Commercial egg farms don't keep roosters with their laying hens because roosters aren't necessary for hens to produce eggs. Hens lay eggs naturally as part of their reproductive cycle, whether a rooster is present or not. This might seem strange if you're used to thinking of eggs as baby chickens waiting to happen, but it's actually similar to how many other animals reproduce. Female chickens, like female mammals, produce egg cells regularly. In mammals, if the egg isn't fertilized, it's simply reabsorbed or expelled during a menstrual cycle. In chickens, the egg cell gets packaged up in a shell and laid regardless of fertilization. The hen's body doesn't know or care whether the egg has been fertilized. It's going to produce and lay that egg either way. So when you crack open a grocery store egg, you're not ending a potential life. You're eating an unfertilized egg cell, closer in concept to an ingredient than a developing organism. Now this raises another question. If the eggs are already unfertilized, why do we refrigerate them? If they were never going to hatch anyway, what's the point of keeping them cold? The answer has nothing to do with stopping chicks from developing and everything to do with freshness and food safety. Eggs are incredibly nutritious, which is exactly why we eat them. But that same nutrition makes them a perfect environment for bacteria to grow. When an egg is laid, it's covered in a natural protective coating called the bloom or cuticle. This coating seals the porous shell and helps keep bacteria out. In many countries outside the United States, eggs are sold at room temperature because they still have this protective layer intact. But in the US, eggs are washed before being sold to remove any dirt or potential contaminants. This washing process also removes the bloom, which means the eggs are now more vulnerable to bacteria. Refrigeration slows bacterial growth dramatically, keeping the eggs safe to eat for weeks instead of days. But here's where it gets interesting. If you did have a fertilized egg, one that actually had the potential to become a chick, refrigeration would stop its development. A fertilized egg needs to be kept at around 37 to 38 degrees Celsius, roughly 99 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, for the embryo to grow. This is the temperature of a mother hen sitting on her nest. At this temperature, cells begin dividing, tissues start forming, and within about 21 days, a chick hatches. But if you take that same fertilized egg and put it in a refrigerator at around 4 degrees Celsius or 40 degrees Fahrenheit, the development stops almost immediately. The cold doesn't kill the embryo right away, but it puts it into a kind of suspended animation. If the egg is refrigerated for more than a few days, the embryo will eventually die because it can't survive prolonged cold. So in that sense, refrigeration does prevent hatching, but only if the egg was fertilized to begin with. This is why farmers who want to hatch chicks are very careful about how they handle fertilized eggs. They collect them quickly, store them at cool but not cold temperatures, usually around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, and never let them sit for more than about 7 to 10 days before putting them in an incubator. The longer a fertilized egg waits before incubation, the lower the chance it will successfully hatch. Temperature control is everything. Too cold and the embryo dies. Too warm before you're ready to incubate, and development begins prematurely and unevenly, which can also kill the embryo. It's a delicate balance that commercial hatcheries have perfected, but it's not something you'd ever encounter with grocery store eggs. Another thing people often wonder is whether you can tell the difference between a fertilized and unfertilized egg just by looking at it. The short answer is not easily. If you crack open a fertilized egg that hasn't been incubated, it looks almost identical to an unfertilized one. You might notice a tiny white spot on the yolk called the blaster disc in an unfertilized egg, or a slightly larger, more defined spot called the blastoderm in a fertilized egg. But these are subtle differences that most people wouldn't recognize unless they knew what to look for. If the fertilized egg has been incubated for a few days, you'd start to see blood vessels and early development, but by then it's obvious. For practical purposes, if you bought it at a grocery store, it's unfertilized and there's nothing to worry about. It's also worth noting that eating fertilized eggs isn't harmful or unusual in some parts of the world. In many countries, small farms keep roosters with their hens, so fertilized eggs end up in the market. As long as those eggs haven't been incubated, they're perfectly safe to eat and taste no different from unfertilized ones. The idea that fertilized eggs are somehow different or less desirable is mostly a cultural preference, not a food safety issue. In fact, some people argue that eggs from farms where roosters are present might come from healthier, more natural flocks, though there's no scientific evidence that the eggs themselves are nutritionally superior. So to bring it all together, grocery store eggs don't hatch into chicks because they were never fertilized in the first place. The hens that laid them never encountered a rooster, so there's no genetic material to create an embryo. Refrigeration plays a role in keeping those eggs fresh and safe to eat by slowing bacterial growth, but it's not what's preventing chicks from developing. Even if you left a grocery store egg out on your counter for weeks, you'd end up with a spoiled, bacteria-filled egg, not a chick. The only way to get a chick is to start with a fertilized egg, keep it at the right temperature, and incubate it under carefully controlled conditions for 3 weeks. It's a process that requires intention, equipment, and the right kind of egg to begin with. This distinction between fertilized and unfertilized eggs is something most people never think about, but it's fundamental to understanding how chickens reproduce and how our food system works. The eggs we eat are a byproduct of the hen's natural reproductive cycle, not the destruction of potential life. They're a renewable resource that hens produce whether we collect them or not. And refrigeration, far from being the reason they don't hatch, is simply a modern food safety practice that keeps them fresh long enough to travel from farm to store to your kitchen. It's a perfect example of how a simple question can reveal layers of biology, agriculture, and food science that usually stay hidden behind the routine of cracking an egg for breakfast. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution.